Hi, I'm Emma.
And I'm Helena, and we both work at the MS Trust. Just a little disclaimer, we're still recording this over Zoom because of coronavirus and social distancing, so apologies if the sound is iffy at any stage. Please do bear with us.
We'd like to welcome you to our podcast, Multiple Sclerosis, Breaking It Down. Today we'll be talking about MS cold sensitivity, which is quite fitting as we head towards Christmas and colder times too.
Yes, Emma, the weather outside is frightful and my MS symptoms are not so delightful. And I know I'm not alone in this, actually.
That's right. On social media, we've had a number of you sharing how the temperature can affect your MS symptoms. In the summer, we hear a lot of people talking about how their heat sensitivity can affect them, but there are lots of people affected by cold sensitivity too. So a lady called Nicola said that she couldn't warm up once she gets too cold, and it seems to take her absolutely ages and all of her symptoms flare up. And then we also heard from Scarlett, who said that she feels that the cold makes her body work on overdrive and also increases her stress levels, which isn't obviously very good.
Yeah, and Alison and David agreed and said that when cold sensitivity hits, they just want to curl up in a blanket and go to sleep.
Of course, some people can experience both heat and cold sensitivity. We heard from some of you who did experience both, and it can make obviously summer and winter a bit of a challenge. We even heard from Sarah, who moved all the way from Italy to the UK to help manage her symptoms.
So cold sensitivity is definitely a thing. And earlier this week, I chatted to Dr Nikos Evangelou about this. Shall we have a listen?
Today, on this rather chilly morning, I'm here with neurologist Dr Nikos Evangelou, who's done some work into temperature sensitivity and multiple sclerosis. Am I right to say that you got a bit of an interest in the subject?
Yes. I have some very competent people and the whole lab on temperature regulations. I collaborate with people in Loughborough University. And of course, it's something that, in the neurology clinics, we hear it all the time. People, report the sensitivities to cold, to warm. And so it's an important topic, has not been explored enough.
No. And I think it's an interesting one, because every time we post about it, if we post in the summer to say to people, it's hot, let's try and stay cool, there will always be some people saying, oh, I love the heat, the cold is the horrible thing, and vice versa. Now there's a lot of people who are complaining about the cold, but there's always some people that are popping up and saying, oh, but it's lovely now. So first question, I guess, is what is temperature sensitivity in MS and how does it sort of manifest?
Most of the people, and they will find out they concentrate on the hot weather, exactly as you said. Most of the people will concentrate on the hot and sweaty summers. And what a lot of people will report is that they're getting very, very easily tired, and they're getting more symptoms related with the temperature changes. And so the textbooks will describe that people with multiple sclerosis, they are more sensitive to heat. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they will develop new symptoms. Sometimes some of the symptoms that they have been there, they resurface. You will have a weakness of your right leg and you can function all right, but the weather will become really hot, and then the right leg will start causing problems again. And if anything, this sensitivity to heat is, if you do these questionnaires, and every person that will come to the clinic, you say, what's going on with the temperature, they'll probably 60 to 80% of the people, they say, I have been experiencing some problems with the heat, and some of my symptoms are worse. So this is what most people will talk about, the sensitivity to heat. And there are some studies that they have looked into how this affects. So every so often, and recently actually, I had a patient who was telling me that whenever I'm getting hot, I develop this tingling of my toes, no other symptoms. Normal day, normal, everything is fine. And my father has multiple sclerosis. Do you think there is a bit something about it? And then I have had some problems 10 years ago with my vision. Yeah. And then you say, oh, this relationship. So if anything, to me, when I heard the story, I said it's very likely to be multiple sclerosis. And we did the scans, and we found out that this is what it is. So the hot weather and the hot, this is, somebody described it, I don't know, 100 years back, UTOFs, and everybody talks about this UTOFs phenomenon, which means that the symptoms very frequently get worse with the temperature. And that affects, as I said, many people with multiple sclerosis. And even the old days, I'm old, but not that old. People were saying that we didn't have any other tests, we didn't have MRIs, and people were using this hot bath test.
Yes, I remember reading about that.
I mean, this is a bit bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just put you on a hot bath, and because the weakness will become a bit more. I don't know how accurate, how reliable the test was, and certainly nobody's using it at the moment. But every so often you'll hear people reporting that, oh, look, I'm having my hot bath and my shower, and then it will take me a bit of time to get back. But as we're discussing about the cold weather, and as you were saying earlier on, it is quite cold outside.
Yeah.
There are a number of people that will report exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
And they will say that as soon as it starts getting cold, nothing works. Sort of the symptoms, they become worse. So, very long-winded answer. Yes, 60 or 70 or 80% of the people will say in the hot summer they will have worsening of the symptoms. But there is a problem also with the cold, and probably a smaller proportion, I don't know, probably 5% or 10%, they will say that in the cold weather things are not working very well either.
And are we looking at the sort of same symptoms that would occur in the cold weather as in the hot weather?
Interesting, actually. This has not been looked at. That's very interesting. That's another idea. So the vision, the worsening of the vision is very frequently reported with the hot weather. I have only heard it once been reported in the cold weather.
Yeah.
It is more weakness, I think, with the cold weather. Weakness and aching and stiffness that gets worse. Sometimes people, report the MS hug, the being, the squeezing of your body that is worsening with the cold. Whereas I think, some of we call them the positive symptoms, tingling. I think it's more common to hear it in hot weather.
Yeah.
But actually, I'm now describing my personal experience. So if somebody says to me, "Oh no, it hasn't happened to me," or we haven't done the study, I'll say, I know. So yes, the vision is predominantly an effect of the hot weather, but needs to be explored. And aching and weakness is probably more of a cold symptom.
That's interesting. We have had a guest on the show before when we were talking about exercise, and he was saying when he goes out running, his vision sometimes goes a bit funny, and especially when he's running in the heat, which I suppose would explain.
That is true. And actually, I remember another nice lady who came to me and with these isolated symptoms, without any history of MS, without anything else, and obviously because I see people with multiple sclerosis, but also I see other neurological conditions. I thought, I have never come across this as an isolated syndrome. And of course, at the end, it happened to be MS, another exactly as a first symptom, as the only symptom of MS. You go and run your half marathon, and then the vision becomes blurred. And usually with the temperature, with a high temperature, as soon as you cool down a bit, the symptoms return back again.
Yeah.
And so yes, it's interesting.
Now, we were talking about it being a bit colder at the moment, and I suppose it is meant to be getting even colder. Is there any sort of specific temperatures that we should be expecting the people who get affected by cold sensitivity to start feeling anything?
No, I mean, this is the difficulty, and there is, like life is beautiful with the variation of life, and we celebrate diversity. And similarly, we have diversity with some of the symptoms. And exactly as you were saying, you know, some people with very similar MS, as you know, if you can say that somebody will have a similar type of MS. Some people they will say that I cannot stand the heat, and others they say, what are you talking about? I cannot stand the cold.
Yeah.
So then you can say that, you know, how does this work? How does this work? You have, I don't know, 10 white matter lesions in your brain. You have 10 white matter lesions in your brain. How can you have completely the opposites? And we still do not understand it. So people have, so if you look at the nerve cells, both in the brain and in the what do we call in our arms and legs, the peripheral nerves, and you say how fast they send the signal, there seems to be that if they're really cold, they are not sending the signal very fast. If they are normal temperature, you know, we are sending it all right. And if we're getting hot, then there is some impairment of the signal being sent.
Yeah.
And this happens in everybody, irrespective of, you know, this is from young children to whatever. Now, if you have multiple sclerosis, if you have loss of myelin, if the insulation is not working very well, there is also a complete blockage of some of the signals with changes of the temperature. And people have looked tiny little different change of the temperature. You know, some people have said even a quarter of a degree. A quarter of a degree. A quarter of a degree is, you know, you and me, we cannot perceive it.
Yeah.
But a quarter of a degree will make a difference in the signal, whether it is traveling or not. So, and because there is so much variability, there will be some that they will be in the Sahara and they will say it's okay.
Yeah.
And some with a slight increase of the temperature or a slight decrease of the temperature, they will be affected. So it's I think it's a bit difficult to say, oh, maintain the temperature of your house at 22 degrees.
Yeah.
Because some people will prefer it and will be more comfortable at 25, and some people, I'm talking about Celsius because I don't do Fahrenheit, and some people, you know, 18 will be absolutely fine. So yes, I think there is a lot of variability, and like we know about many other symptoms, you know, we need to accept it, and you know, common sense should prevail. I mean, that happens in most of the effect of medication. So, you know, people are asking me, you know, how much gabapentin should I take for my pain? You know, depends on the pain. You know, you start with this, and if things is not, you know, good enough control, just increase the dose a bit. If you find that the side effects are too much, then decrease. So for some of these symptoms, you know, the patient knows their body. You know, who am I, a doctor or a physiotherapist, to say, oh no, you should stick to that. So I would have said that there is a range of temperatures. Again, I talk a lot in case you haven't noticed. There is a range of temperatures. I think it's important to fit what suits you better. It doesn't matter if the textbook says high temperature or low temperature.
How common is it to sort of be affected by both? I was talking about how things are slightly different. I definitely don't feel great when it's too hot. I mean, I'm a Swede, so I should maybe, you know, the Vikings and the cold and all that. But so sometimes when it's very hot, and I feel it often, if I'm out exercising, that I have one leg that gets a bit affected, that it can feel a little bit weak. But when it's very, very cold, it feels like it's sort of almost like a twist. It feels like somebody's just grabbed my leg and really twisted it hard. But it has to be fairly cold for that to happen. But is it common that people who are
it is common? I mean, it is common. You know, I have come across it, and it depends. Of course, we're talking about the extremes, and I think that people without multiple sclerosis, if they go to Sahara and they go to the north of Sweden, they will report worsening or things. You know, the body is not working very well. And actually, a couple of times studies were done and they have measured the change of the temperature, how it affected both on the warm side, on the extreme, the vision. They have done a number of studies where, they can measure how fast the signal from the eye goes to the brain, and that is affected. But also the opposite, when it gets a bit cold, it's also affected compared to the normal, sort of the average range. So you keep hearing of people, reporting more numbness or even bladder symptoms. And so, of course, bladder symptoms with a cold, we know there is also other mechanisms that, the kidneys are working in a different way. But a number of these symptoms can get worse, both with the warm climate and the cold climate.
I think when it comes to temperature, I mean, before I was diagnosed, one of the first things that happened to me when I gone on to the journey of being diagnosed was that I stepped into a shower and it felt really cold on one side and it's sort of normal water on one side. And then if I sat down somewhere, which was a cold seat, it felt warm on one side of the body. So again, maybe not to do with sensitivity, but it seems to have some sort of inner thermostat that's been a bit messed up inside of me.
The thermostat, it's interesting actually. So there are pathways, the sensory pathways that you can say, because this part of my body is affected, I cannot feel it, and becomes not very reactive. I cannot feel the hot, but I cannot feel it on the other side. But then, of course, there are slightly different symptoms. There is something that called allodynia. Allodynia is the sensation. You have one sensation, and you feel it as differently.
Oh, okay.
And people, they will say that there is what is called the touch is a mechanical effect. The touch, I can feel it, and if somebody touches your arm, say I can feel it, and this is allodynia. Now, there is a small proportion of people that you touch, and this is painful. This is, you're touching me and, I have a pain. And it happens in a proportion of people. But a significant proportion of people with multiple sclerosis, they have what is called cold allodynia. So it's something like a third of the people with MS, they will say that touching cold induces pain.
Interesting.
So, if you walk on the snow, it's not very pleasant, and you're I don't know how many meters can you walk on the snow before you start getting this awkward experience. But a third of the people with multiple sclerosis, if they walk on the snow, they will say this is painful.
Yeah,
this is painful. Purely, in a different sensation. I feel it, but I feel it as pain. And it is so some people, I was trying in a silly me, and I destroyed an electric knife and electric. So I was trying to cut some frozen chicken. Don't ask why this weekend. And apart from destroying my new present, I was trying to hold the frozen chicken because I was in a hurry, and I wanted to try to froze. My hands were freezing, but it was all right. Yeah. So a number of people with neurological conditions and multiple sclerosis, they will feel it as significant pain that has not been able to do that. So some people recommend, if you're trying to get things from the freezer, if you find that it is painful, you can have your gloves there. I mean, I don't know how practical this can be, but for people, and I was talking to a friend of mine who has 7 freezers in his house. Don't ask why. So, that's you do, because they like the frozen food. So if you have 7 freezers in the house and you have the sensitivity to cold and you want to take things out, in that case, have your freezer glove.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Are there any other sort of steps? Because one of the questions that people were saying, how do I actually plan to get through the winter if I'm affected by cold sensitivity? What's apart from wrapping up with your gloves?
So some, I can start with the, I don't know if it is. Obviously, it is very, very serious, and I can take it as a joke or and you as a Swede will know that. So I went to Norway several years back to examine a PhD thesis. So one of the neurologists, when they do their research, they study for 2 or 3 years, and they study a topic. And his study was about eating fish and whether salmon is good for multiple sclerosis.
Mhm.
But they were telling me about a physiotherapy study that they were undertaken and now has been published in the literature. And they were saying that actually, if we have to have some intensive physiotherapy, and of course, this is where with the NHS, some people might laugh even discussing this. If we have to have some intensive physiotherapy and we're going to give them a few weeks of physiotherapy, do we do this physiotherapy in Norway or do we do it in Spain?
Okay.
What do you think?
Well, I would guess that most people would go for Spain being, nice and warm.
I think so. I think so. And a number of people actually, one of the comments that they were making that, it is not uncommon in Swedish MS centers to organize some intensive physio in warmer climates.
Yeah, I've heard about this. Yeah, I think there's a few of them that have almost like an extra center that they send people to abroad, where it's
which is exact. So the one of the studies that they did is they have taken. I mean, you can always trying to find weaknesses in the studies and have they done this right? Have they not this right? There were people with secondary progressive MS, and they went to Spain, and half of them went to Spain and had a month of intensive rehabilitation and physio and occupational therapists, and the other half stayed in Norway. And the next year they swapped, and they have measured how far can you walk and a number of other things. And indeed, they have found that people that they were in Spain, they were having the physiotherapy in Spain, they were able to walk a bit further after the physio. And it's interesting, this effect, according to the study, lasted for several months later. Because, so what does this mean? What does this mean? Shall we all go to Spain to have our, or shall we go to Florida for the, I wish we could, but
especially on the NHS, that would be nice, wouldn't it?
It would be absolutely nice, absolutely nice. That's what I was thinking, and but this is some of the rules and the relatively rigid advice that sometimes you get, or people with multiple sclerosis cannot do hot. And exactly as you were saying, lots of people say, "Are you kidding me? I love my Spanish holiday, so something this is I'm having a great time." So if you have the ability and you have found that having a week in a warmer climate, then this is almost perfect. But the other things, as you were saying, that some of the concerns. And you can go overboard. So when we didn't understand that some people with MS, they have this sensitivity to cold, there was this question, are they dressing up too warm? They were twisting, some people were twisting the argument to say, is it possible because you have been obsessed with a cold and you don't like it, are you putting so many clothes and you end up yourself so hot that you're gone completely on the other side?
I see.
And you are inflicting. So this is one of the things that you say, that obviously multiple layers, and again in Sweden better than me, multiple layers is more effective as opposed to having a huge jumper that might not protect you as much, and the mobility, of course, if you have how many layers of clothing, you would imagine that my movements will be affected.
Mm.
There has been a lot of discussion about the core temperature.
Yeah.
And some of the experiments we did in Loughborough, but also other the scientific literature is not very clear about the cold temperature. So the core temperature is not like, oh, because I put a couple of jumpers, the center of my body, the temperature of my brain is warmer or not. So the body has an enormous flexibility to maintain, a balance in temperature and other parameters that it's not necessarily that all the changes that we're reporting with the temperature is related with the change of the core temperature. And, there are lots of things that we don't fully understand. So, for example, the warming up of the athletes, why do they warm up?
Well, I guess to get your muscles going, and so you're not super stiff when you start.
And but the same applies, but we become super stiff with the cold weather. We know, for example, one of the undisputed spasticity is the stiffness, what the doctors and the physiotherapists call spasticity. The stiffness relates to cold. So if we take people without any neurological disease and you put them in a cold bath, the arms and legs become stiff, possibly because we need to generate, we even start trembling because we need to generate. But this generation means that all the muscles are contracting just to generate some heat. If the muscles are contracting, both what we call the agonist and antagonist. So when I'm flexing my arm, I'm relaxing some, I'm flexing my bicep, but I'm relaxing my triceps. But if I'm in a cold bath, I need to generate heat. I'm contracting both my biceps and my triceps, and my arm becomes stiff.
Yeah.
Now, it is not that extreme, but people with neurological conditions, especially when they have a stiffness of the muscles because of the damage to the brain, they can have this increased spasticity with the temperature. And we don't fully understand this. What I was saying, that there is a lot of debate about the benefits of warming up. And we know that everybody who is an athlete, everybody who does the gym at home and they do their stretching and the exercise, they warm up in the beginning. And we don't fully understand what is the function of this warming up. Exactly as you said, Elena, that, you warm up the muscles, blood goes there and circulates. And if I said to you, just prove it to me, what do you mean? It's something that we almost feel it, but we don't know the microscopic level, the molecular level, because of course, if we fully understand it, then we might produce some treatments for this, but we haven't got it yet.
That's very interesting, because when I go for a run, even if I'm going out when it's cold, I do tend to do a warm up before inside the house. And when I go out, I don't tend to get that sort of grippy spasticity pain in my leg. But if I go out for a walk, say that I just go up to the shop, or I'll go and pick up my son from school, that's when it tends to happen much more than when I go running. And I guess, again, then the muscle is cold when I go outside.
I mean, this is the kind of things that we could learn, and we can work together with other fields of medicine. So, for example, the benefits of the warming up. I have no doubt. I have experienced myself. You have experienced yourself that there is a real benefit, but we don't understand exactly. Is it the temperature related, or again, we're talking about warming up. Or is it that the muscles 2 or 3 times they need a bit of oiling? Obviously they don't have oil in the muscles, but the equivalent of oiling. And there are a number of adjustments, metabolic adjustments. You have all these molecules in the muscles that they change, and it needs to happen before we fully use our legs in running and walking and so on. But still, it's interesting that even for something studied scientifically so much, like exercising and warming up, people are still reporting, we don't understand it.
Yeah.
So, I'm using examples like this is when, I don't know, in the MS circles, we're complaining, oh, not enough research is being done and we don't understand it. There are lots of things we still do not understand.
This summer, there was a lot of talk about the benefits of really cold showers.
Yes.
You were talking about having a hot bath test. I mean, had there been any research in what happens to people with MS if they do go and have a very cold shower?
I haven't come across. Actually, there are some. You're absolutely right. There was an interest on the cold shower, and as it happens, today I tried it. Every so often I remember it, and there is this idea of but of course, the cold shower. My understanding is, from the sauna you get the change, and it's more of hormonal, the euphoria, the change of the internal condition that they might give you. But I haven't seen actually in MS. I can imagine if suddenly you have a cold shower and you have a degree of stiffness of the muscles, you will be quite unpleasantly, experience. There are people that they will say, look, I can participate in your research. I'm not exposed to cold. I don't want this bad experience. I mean, this is the difficulty. The cold, and it is not a temperature only. I mean, you can say, what are you talking about? Cold is temperature, but the cold. If you have a cold shower, and they were talking about the surprise bang that hits you suddenly, and this might release a number of other internal chemical cytokines that makes us feel better or worse. People are debating also some of the miserable feeling that we have with winter because the cold is longer.
Yeah.
Because our sleep sometimes is disturbed. Can we easily disentangled from the temperature?
Yeah.
So if you go from your hot flat and you go out, you can say, oh, it is clear. I can certainly tell the difference that the cold hits me. But when people come along and say, oh, I'm always terrible, my MS is worse in the winter.
Yeah.
You don't know, is it the light? Is it the effect this has on our mood? Or is it the coldness on our muscles? And
that's an interesting, because I mean, there has obviously been a lot of talk about and research into vitamin D, and the fact that, further away from equator, the more people have got MS. Coming from Scandinavia, there's, the Viking gene and all that. So I suppose it's it's not just one thing, is it, with MS?
It's not one thing. It's not one thing, and it's interesting. As you said about the vitamin D, we know that the vitamin D levels, I don't want to over exaggerate. I think, high levels of vitamin D are very useful for everybody and for multiple sclerosis, with evidence about increased inflammation. And we know also the vitamin D levels drops in the winter.
Yeah.
I think it's a good thing to look at it as a package and leave it to some crazy scientists to try to disentangle which one of is the most important factor. But if you are sensitive to cold, it will be nice to use the common sense wrapping with different clothes and having hot drinks, because trying to keep the core warmer is probably more effective than just putting lots of gloves. But at the same time, don't ignore that there is a normal variation of our mood during the winter and the summer, the seasonal variation, and some people are affected a bit more. And if you are affected a bit more by the dark weather outside and the long nights,
Yeah.
that will affect your functioning. That will affect, how the legs work.
Yeah.
And, if your vitamin D is 0 in the winter, that might affect it as well. So it's better almost, I think, to be more holistic and say, okay, we're preparing for the winter. This can go wrong. I mean, there are wonderful things in the winter. We have Christmas, we have Christmas lights. This is jolly things to happen. But
it's very true. When I was growing up, I always used to find November was a very hard month because it was so dark. But once we hit December, generally in Sweden, where I lived, we got snow, so it suddenly got brighter because of the whiteness. Whilst over here, since moving to the UK, I do find like it does feel darker. So I don't know, you can see that there's a glow on the side. I got one of those light boxes things, and I think that sort of seems to help a little bit, making you feel like there's more natural light, because there's nothing worse than when you open the curtains and it feels like you're in the middle of the night and it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
But I think this is the kind of things that we are very slow to adapt in medicine and in clinics. So we know that there is, I suspect your great grandmother or something might have said, oh, I'm a bit more miserable in the winter than I am in the summer. And everybody knows it, but you go to the doctor, and until recently was like, what are you talking about? Either you are depressed or you're not depressed. And then you realize that things like this that play a role, and who knows, who can tell you whether the light, the light therapy is useful or not? Only you can tell.
Yeah.
And for some others, it might do nothing.
Yeah.
Like we're discussing, it's exactly the same with the hot and the cold. And you usually find the medical students or the junior doctors, because they have read the textbook, and the textbook say high temperature can cause problems to a proportion of people with multiple sclerosis, full stop.
Yeah.
So when you first come along and you say, oh, mine is cold, they see, oh, Elena is a strange one. I don't know what's wrong with her.
Yeah. So when you were doing research into it, what did you learn? Did you learn anything new that you didn't know?
The most striking thing is that, because we're, don't ask the details, because some of the details are a bit invasive. We were trying to measure the temperature, the core temperature, and how much it changes. So Loughborough University has these chambers that you can regulate the temperature very, very accurately. And because we said the individual response sometimes can vary even with a quarter of a degree, half a degree, 1 degree of Celsius. And we have found, and you can increase the temperature, you can decrease the temperature. And we did found that both the subjective reporting of how do I feel, but also some of the tests we're doing were affected by temperature.
Yeah.
There is no doubt about it. But the core temperature, the inside temperature, remained the same. So it is not a purely, so there is a part of the brain that's called the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus controls a number of our internal environment, and for example, the appreciation of this is day, this is night, this is the temperature that autonomic functions, how much we sweat, and there are lots of these functions are controlled in hypothalamus. And because it can be affected like every other part of the body, of the brain, by multiple sclerosis, it tends to be assumed that, people with the sensitivity to cold, they should have an abnormality in this part of the brain, the hypothalamus, because that can control the core temperature. And we have found that people are reporting worsening symptoms, but without the core temperature changing. So this is like the muscles. The muscles, for example, are far away from the core, and if the muscles get cold, then they become stiff. So you can see that gradually we become a bit more sophisticated. But gradually we understand how much we don't understand.
Yeah.
And at least lots of different avenues that opening. You remember for the cold, some people benefit from the special vest of the cooling vest. Others they're finding a bit cumbersome, but it's a matter of finding how can we make any adaptations, even with clothing, to suit you better, to suit some individual better. None of the medicines work 100% to all people with MS. The same applies to disease-modifying therapies. The same applies to symptomatic treatments. So in a similar way, some people say, "Oh, physiotherapy is fantastic," and others they say, "I'm not finding that useful." So different individuals respond in a different way.
And I suppose with some of these things, obviously medication, you do need health professionals to help you out with what you're supposed to be doing. But like we talked about light boxes or exercise, you can try and have a go and see if it works and test it yourself.
Yes, and I think it's very, very important to also take responsibility. Different individuals react in a different way, but taking responsibilities for some of your symptoms and symptoms management. I mean, we're moving slightly from, I think it's done particularly badly in multiple sclerosis. So obviously you go to a lovely MS center that they look after you fantastic, and you have excellent neurologists, nurses, but I find that many people complain that, look, we go to the clinic and to the NHS clinic, and we hear about disease-modifying therapies, and all of a sudden 90% of the conversation is about disease-modifying therapies, but we don't have the time to talk about the spasticity, the stiffness. We talk about the coldness. So I think this is some of the symptoms management. Almost the patient has to get hold and say, look, I'm in charge of this, because if I leave it to the doctors, obviously I need to educate the doctors and the nurses that these are important. It's important, affect you every day. I go out running and or picking up the kids, and what am I then? Unless I express this, then nobody will take it seriously. Will not do enough research on this.
Yeah. Speaking of research, are you planning on doing anything more into temperature-related things?
I mean, there are so many things that we're wrapping up some of the results that we're collecting before, and there are lots of things that can be done. It's about timing and effort, and one of the things that I was not involved, but I was very, very impressed. They have put people on a bicycle, and they were exercising, and half of the group, they have given them cold water. That one, you have a cold water, and the other have normal temperature water. And the people with the cold water, they were able to cycle further. They were able to, and I think this is fantastic, isn't it? Sort of, this is in a small group. I think this study needs to happen again and make sure that this is all right, because in that case, the next time that you say, oh, I go for a walk, but I get tired, and after 20 minutes, great. But if you have a little bottle of cold water and that keeps you 30 minutes, that's even better. So there are lots of things, there are lots of things that we can do.
That's very interesting. I think in one of the future podcasts that we got planned, we were going to talk about menopause and MS, and obviously things like hot flushes and things like that. That feels like also a field where there should be a bit more research into.
I think so. And there recently some research starting. Obviously, some research has been done, but I think more is needed, and more is needed, especially in MS, apart from other things. So if you have irrespective of the temperature, if you have a disturbed night, because you wake up, it's very, very similar to bladder symptoms. If you have to get up 4 or 5 times and you go to the toilet, you know that people that they have this condition, it's called this obstructive sleep apnea.
Yeah.
You know, some sort of a snoring and interrupted of the sleep. One of the striking things is that the road traffic accidents is many times higher than people that do not have obstructive sleep apnea, because they are not sleeping very well at night. They're waking up, so then they, you know, they're always a bit more lethargic and a bit more sleepy during the day, and you have your mini sleeps while you're driving, and then you can have your accident. So, but of course, it's not a matter of accident. So if you have your menopause and you are not refreshed from your sleep, then you're miserable. You can be miserable the rest of the day.
Is there any advice on how cold or warm we should be keeping our bedrooms to get the ultimate sleep?
I don't think that anybody, I mean, you got me here. So, but yes, you know, I cannot, I don't think that it can be an advice on this.
Yeah.
And because we are all so different, and some people operate optimally, you know, at 20 degrees. So, you know, this, you know, 18, 19, 20 degrees has been used as very, very frequently. But I find it's a bit difficult to impose. So if you enjoy your 22 degrees and it's perfect, you know, trying to change it, you know, I think it's a, you know, and I'm not certain it's worth it.
No, it is, again, a try and test it and see what works for you.
I mean, the temperature, absolutely. You know, the other things that also, if you read about it is not only multiple sclerosis. So these principles we're discussing at the moment affects a number of neurological conditions. So people with spinal cord injuries, and they have the same principles and the same thing that, you know, if you expose them into cold, you know, the walking ability is affected by the stiffness that they're having. So whatever people with neurological conditions, people with multiple sclerosis, they are reporting and say, hey, low temperatures in the cold cause my legs go, you know, stiff and they're not working. It's a very real phenomenon. It's worth, you know, exploring it a bit more, because, you know, we have 4 or 5 months of cold temperature. If we find the best way to deal with this, that would be fantastic.
And I think doing this podcast is a good start to actually start talking about it. As you say, sometimes people aren't really aware that people with MS are affected by this, and they don't, you know, mustn't grumble and people just get on with things. But actually, it might be a case of having to try some different things to make yourself feel better.
No, absolutely. I mean, you know, there are lots of different mechanisms, and you know, in a way, the science in me says that if we're able to dissect the different mechanisms, then we might find specific treatments for some of those symptoms. So there is something that you have heard about, the Raynaud's. Raynaud's is this symptoms that people experience, you know, the part of the body, usually the fingers, the fingers and toes, they become very, very cold and they become numb. And at the extremes, you can even have a complete shutdown of the circulations, and you can have this Raynaud's phenomenon that I don't know, affects people. You know, it's quite common. I don't know. People say that 5% of the people that have Raynaud's, but at the same time, people with multiple sclerosis and other conditions, they have this secondary Raynaud's, possibly because the autonomic control is, you know, we have a heart that pumps, and sometimes the heart needs to pump faster because we are scared, or because, you know, we are very, very hot, and sometimes pumps slower. Sometimes our arteries dilate and sometimes constrict. And this, of course, we're not thinking. We cannot say heart pump faster.
Yeah.
So this is an autonomic response. And of course, the autonomic response is a nervous response, is a nervous system response. So it can be affected by multiple sclerosis. And so we see, for example, in the clinic, there are more people reporting Raynaud's symptoms, that the fingers become really, really cold, than in other clinics. So this is where we go down the route that obviously the keeping warm and gloves is the first thing, but sometimes there are medicines specifically that can be prescribed with the aim of making things a bit better.
You mentioned briefly sort of bladder problems. I know, growing up in a cold Sweden, we were always told not to sit on the cold because a lot of people ended up getting sort of bladder infections and things, not MS related, but we know that people with MS are quite prone for bladder infections. Is this sort of sound advice, or is this
no?
I
think it's the cold. So the exposure of cold. I don't know about bladder infections. Actually, let's think about it. So the kidneys, they have the hormones. We have these hormones in the body, the antidiuretic hormone, that it's affected, and in the cold is secreted less. So we are generating more dilute urine. Of course, that causes us to need to go to the toilet. The more cold we are, the more we need to go to the toilet. Now, if you have also some obstruction of the bladder, you have some, not necessarily obstruction, if the bladder is not working very well because of the MS, because it's a bit more dilated bladder, by having more urine, you expand the bladder. You can, as a secondary, have more infections. Yeah. So some people that they might need to use more frequent intermittent catheterization, than would have had in a warm climate. Yes, it's not pure mom's tales or grandmother's tales.
That's good.
They might, after we said all the nice things about your grandmother, I think she's right again.
Yeah, well, they're always right, aren't they?
They're always right. They're always right.
So maybe we should end it on listen to your neurologist and listen to your grandmother. Then
I think so. I think that will be. I don't know about listen to the neurologist. Listen to. I think common sense advice that sometimes does take a bit of time to be translated into medical advice. Yeah. It's worth exploring it. It's worth exploring with the MS nurse, but always listen to your grandmother.
I think that is really good. We shall maybe return to you in the summer if you're willing to come on the podcast again, and we can talk about heat sensitivity.
I'll be delighted. I'll be delighted. Elena, lovely to talk to you.
Now, if this was a commercial podcast, here is where there would be an advert. But as we're a charity, we don't do that. So instead, we'd like to take the opportunity to tell you all about our fantastic resources for people with MS.
Our website, which is mstrust.org.uk, has tons of information and resources for people affected by MS, including some information about temperature sensitivity, both for the hot is evil and cold is bad camps. Head over to our A to Z and look under T for temperature. And we're back.
I enjoyed chatting to Dr. Nikos. I think you might hear that in the actual chat. He was very interesting, I found. He had a lot to say about both heat and cold, I suppose, even if we did try to focus more on the cold things. I hadn't thought about it before, but the thing he was saying about the pain in touching ice. I was defrosting my freezer. I don't have 10 freezers or whatever it was his friend had. And I was removing some big blocks of ice, and I was like in tears. It was so painful. And I just thought to myself that I'd become a bit of a weakling with old age, because when I grew up in Sweden, I used to be able to sort of go outside and, make snowballs and all sorts without wearing gloves. Not to recommend, but I was just like, you're supposed to be from Sweden. You should be able to handle this. But yeah, it was horrible. So I do feel less bad now because it was actually a real thing.
Yeah, I think he definitely raised some really interesting points. We were obviously discussing before the recording, Helena, about how I felt it was really good that Dr. Nikos sort of talked around the subject and gave some real life experiences as examples. And it was just also those bits like when he said about how cold sensitivity, you know, if it comes to the winter and you're not feeling 100% with your MS, have you thought about whether it's something different? You know, we all feel a little bit different in the winter when the light levels are different and bits and pieces like that, and it's sometimes really important to look at the whole bigger picture.
I think that was really one thing, because we know that heat sensitivity definitely is a thing in this whole thing about UTOFs, that it does, you know, make the signals a bit funny when it's really hot. But I think when it comes to the cold, he did make me think about it like, yes, you associate the cold weather with all the sort of darkness and the gloominess and all those bits. But that saying, I think definitely the stiffness seems to be a thing, because I do see a lot of comments on social media about that people are feeling spasticity and stiff a lot during this time of year. But I thought it was quite interesting what he was saying, where people go maybe overboard the other way, so they wrap up too warm, so they actually start getting affected by heat sensitivity, even though they're trying to battle the cold sensitivity. So I don't know, you can't win, can you?
No, I do think it's important to find that happy medium, isn't it? You know, some people do it regardless. They sort of put their radiator really high, they think it's cold, and they put it straight on like a 5 or a 6, and then realize that actually maybe you need to just try something in between and work up from there.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, just like you have to try and test these things and sort of see where you end up to. I mean, I love the idea of going on a warmer holiday, maybe not, you know, somewhere where it's Sahara Desert hot, but just a little bit warmer. But I guess especially in these strange times, holidays might not be on the card for a while yet. So I guess we'll just have to be able to do what we can do to try and keep warm. So I shall be trying to drink more warm drinks, but maybe not coffee all the time, because that's definitely not so good for my bladder. But I do think we'll definitely try to get Dr. Nikos back on the show in the new year to talk more about heat sensitivity and MS.
Yeah, that'd be brilliant. And speaking of the new year, actually, this is our last podcast for 2021. But not to worry, we'll be back in January. And our next podcast is going to be on for people who are worried they may have MS. But we'd love to hear your input on the topic. So maybe you want to share how you suspected that you maybe first had MS, what prompted you to go to the doctors, sort of how the experience was for you, anything that you think would be really useful for someone in that position. So we'd love to hear from you. Drop us a note on WhatsApp. That's on 0745 830 3326, and we might include yours in the podcast.
Yes, please leave us some messages, because we would love to hear what you have to say on the topic. But just a quick note, we can't answer any questions on WhatsApp. The account will only be monitored for voice notes and contributions for the podcast.
If you did have any questions about MS, or perhaps MS and even cold sensitivity, we're here for you. Our inquiry service is available Monday to Friday, except UK bank holidays, and obviously there's a few of those coming up with Christmas. That's from 9 AM to 5 PM. Outside of these hours, you're welcome to leave us a message and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Our inquiry service number is 0800 032 3839, or you can email us on ask@mstrust.org.uk.
And you can also find us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter and Instagram. If you want to find out our opening hours during Christmas, they'll be all plastered on social media, but they will also be on our website. And you can also find this podcast on Spotify, Google and Apple Podcast and Amazon Music. Get in touch, and like they say, like and subscribe. We would also like to say a big thank you to Anne Chapman Audio for the music of this podcast.